This ground that I'm walking on right now, it used to be covered by water. And as lake levels are expected to continue to drop here at Lake Mead, the gap between where the water was and where it is.
The first images didn't look extraordinary at first glance. A drone drifted silently over the vast blue waters of Lake Mead, capturing the familiar contrast between the deep reservoir and the pale white rock that circles its shoreline. But as the camera descended, something unusual came into focus. What had once been hidden beneath decades of water now lay exposed under the scorching Nevada sun. Entire stretches of rocky ground that had not seen daylight for generations were suddenly visible. Old docks sat stranded hundreds of feet from the water's edge. Rusted boats rested on dry earth. Instead of floating in the lake, they were built to navigate. The famous white bathtub ring surrounding the canyon walls had grown so large that it looked less like a stain and more like a permanent scar across the landscape. For millions of people, these images were shocking. But for scientists who have been watching Lake Mead for years, they represented something even more serious. The shrinking water wasn't simply revealing abandoned boats or forgotten pieces of history. It was exposing the hidden consequences of choices made nearly a century ago. Lake Mead has always represented more than just a lake. Created by the completion of Hoover Dam during the 1930s, it became one of the greatest engineering achievements in American history. The reservoir transformed the deserts of Nevada, Arizona, and California into thriving cities and productive farmland. Without it, Las Vegas would never have become the entertainment capital of the world. Phoenix would have struggled to support millions of residents. Vast agricultural regions across the Southwest would have remained barren desert. For decades, Lake Mead symbolized abundance. Water seemed endless. Electricity flowed from Hoover Dam to millions of homes. Tourists flocked to marinas packed with boats. Fishermen enjoyed productive waters, and families spent summers exploring coves that stretched for miles. Very few people imagined that the lake itself could begin disappearing. Yet that is exactly what has happened. Over the past 2 decades, Lake Mead has experienced one of the most dramatic declines in its history. Year after year, the water level has dropped, exposing more of the canyon walls and revealing landscapes that had been submerged since the reservoir first filled. The reasons are complex. Long periods of drought have reduced the amount of water flowing down the Colorado River. Rising temperatures increase evaporation across the desert. Population growth has placed unprecedented pressure on water supplies, while millions of acres of farmland continue to rely on irrigation from the same river system. Individually, none of these factors would have caused today's crisis. Together, they created a perfect storm. But what captured public attention wasn't the statistics. It was what began appearing along the shoreline. As the water retreated, abandoned marinas emerged from the mud. Concrete foundations that once sat deep underwater now stood fully exposed. Old roads, forgotten boat ramps, and rusted machinery slowly reappeared as though time itself had reversed. Then came discoveries that made international headlines. Human remains. The first widely reported discovery shocked investigators. Skeletal remains were found inside a metal barrel that had surfaced from the receding shoreline. Law enforcement quickly secured the area, while forensic experts began examining the evidence. Soon afterward, additional sets of human remains were recovered from different locations around the lake. Some belonged to individuals who had drowned decades earlier during boating accidents. Others became part of active criminal investigations. Suddenly, Lake Mead wasn't just a story about drought anymore. It had become a place where history, mystery, and forensic science intersected. The discoveries fueled endless speculation online. What else remained hidden beneath the water? How many objects had disappeared into the lake over nearly 90 years? Could entire sections of forgotten history still lie buried beneath layers of mud and sediment? Researchers urged caution. Lake Mead covers hundreds of square miles. During its highest levels, entire canyons, roads, buildings, and natural landscapes disappeared beneath the rising reservoir. It was inevitable that lowering water would expose objects long forgotten. Still, each new discovery reminded people that the lake held far more than water. It held memories, some joyful, some tragic, others still waiting to be understood. Meanwhile, scientists continued documenting another story unfolding beneath the surface. Fish populations were changing. Shoreline ecosystems were adapting. Plants began growing where open water had existed only a few years earlier. Birds shifted their nesting grounds. Desert animals ventured farther toward the newly exposed terrain. Nature, as always, was adjusting. Humans faced a much harder challenge. Every foot the lake loses affects millions of people who rely on its water. The Colorado River system supplies drinking water to cities across 7 U.S. states and northern Mexico. Farmers depend on it to irrigate crops that feed much of the country. Hydroelectric turbines inside Hoover Dam require sufficient water pressure to generate electricity efficiently. As Lake Mead shrinks, each of those systems becomes more difficult to maintain. Officials have introduced conservation programs, negotiated water-sharing agreements, and invested billions of dollars into improving efficiency. Even so, experts acknowledge that the Southwest has entered an era unlike anything modern planners expected. This is no longer viewed simply as a temporary dry spell. Many climatologists believe the region is adapting to a long-term shift toward a warmer, drier climate. That possibility changes everything. Because if today's conditions become tomorrow's normal, then Lake Mead's exposed shoreline may represent not an unusual event, but the beginning of an entirely new chapter in the history of the American West. And perhaps the most surprising part of the story isn't what has already surfaced. It's what still remains hidden beneath the water that has yet to disappear. If Lake Mead could speak, it would tell stories stretching back long before Hoover Dam transformed the Colorado River. Beneath the reservoir lies an older landscape, a world of winding canyons, desert trails, abandoned settlements, and Native American history that disappeared beneath rising water nearly a century ago. Today, as the shoreline retreats farther each year, fragments of that forgotten world are beginning to return. The latest aerial footage reveals more than cracked earth and shrinking water. It captures a landscape in transition. Long, narrow channels cut through dried lakebed like scars across the desert floor. Rock formations that had not been visible since the 1930s now stand exposed once again, their surfaces remarkably preserved after decades underwater. To many viewers, these scenes appear almost post-apocalyptic. Yet every exposed feature tells a story. When Hoover Dam was completed in 1935, it was celebrated as one of the greatest engineering achievements in history. Thousands of workers battled extreme heat, dangerous conditions, and economic hardship to build the massive concrete structure. At over 700 feet tall, the dam was unlike anything the world had seen. Its purpose was clear: tame the unpredictable Colorado River, prevent devastating floods, generate hydroelectric power, and provide water to the rapidly growing Southwest. As the gates closed and water slowly filled the canyon, entire valleys disappeared beneath the surface. Roads vanished. Ranches were abandoned. Small communities relocated. Even sections of historic transportation routes were swallowed by the rising reservoir. For decades, few people gave much thought to what remained below. The lake became the focus instead. Tourists flocked to its beaches. Houseboats became a familiar sight. Fishing tournaments attracted competitors from across the country. Every year, millions visited what appeared to be a permanent inland sea. But nature rarely stays still. As rainfall patterns shifted and water demand increased, Lake Mead began shrinking at a pace few had predicted. Year after year, satellite images documented the steady decline. The once deep blue reservoir gradually revealed more pale shoreline, exposing areas hidden for generations. Then came the discoveries. One of the most striking changes involved abandoned infrastructure. Boat ramps built for high water now ended hundreds of feet from the shoreline. Floating marinas required repeated relocation as the water continued to fall. In some places, concrete foundations emerged almost completely intact, providing a rare glimpse into the original landscape before flooding. Drone operators soon began documenting these forgotten structures from the air. Their footage spread rapidly online, giving millions of viewers an entirely new perspective on Lake Mead's transformation. But the man-made objects were only part of the story. Biologists noticed something equally fascinating happening across the exposed terrain. Plants quickly colonized the newly uncovered soil. Desert shrubs appeared where fish had once swum. Birds explored fresh feeding grounds, while reptiles and small mammals expanded into habitats that had been underwater for decades. Nature was rewriting the landscape with astonishing speed. Scientists describe this process as ecological succession, a gradual replacement of one ecosystem by another. Although it may appear sudden on social media, the changes follow predictable biological patterns. Seeds buried beneath sediment can remain dormant for years before conditions become favorable. Once exposed to sunlight and rainfall, they begin growing almost immediately. Still, the transformation has not been entirely positive. As lake levels decline, water temperatures increase more rapidly during summer months. Warmer water holds less oxygen, placing stress on fish populations. Some species adapt successfully, while others struggle to survive. Researchers also monitor invasive species that can spread more easily under changing environmental conditions. Mussels, invasive plants, and certain fish continue altering the reservoir's delicate ecological balance. Meanwhile, engineers face an entirely different challenge. Hoover Dam depends on water pressure to produce electricity. The lower the reservoir falls, the harder turbines must work to maintain power generation. If levels were ever to drop below critical thresholds, electricity production could become significantly less efficient. Although emergency planning has reduced immediate risks, the possibility illustrates how interconnected the system truly is. Water isn't simply disappearing from a recreational lake. It affects agriculture, municipal drinking supplies, wildlife, tourism, industry, and energy production across multiple states. Every foot matters. Yet perhaps the greatest fascination surrounding Lake Mead remains its ability to preserve history. Cold, oxygen-poor environments beneath deep water often slow the deterioration of certain materials. Boats, machinery, and other objects sometimes remain recognizable for decades. As the lake recedes, archaeologists and historians carefully document newly exposed artifacts before weather and erosion begin damaging them. Not every discovery becomes a headline. Some are surprisingly ordinary. An old fishing lure, a weathered vehicle frame, fragments of docks built generations ago, pieces of forgotten equipment left behind during the reservoir's construction. Individually, they may seem insignificant. Together, they create a timeline of human activity stretching across nearly a century. At the same time, officials remind visitors that removing historical artifacts without authorization can violate federal regulations. Many exposed objects remain protected because they contribute valuable information about the region's history. Another challenge has emerged as curiosity grows. Increasing numbers of visitors attempt to explore newly exposed areas, often underestimating the dangers. Freshly uncovered lakebed can appear solid while concealing deep layers of unstable mud. In some locations, vehicles have become trapped after venturing too far from established roads. Sharp rocks, hidden debris, and intense desert heat add further hazards. Search and rescue teams periodically respond to hikers who underestimate both the distance and environmental conditions surrounding the shrinking reservoir. Ironically, the very landscape attracting worldwide attention can become dangerous for those eager to experience it firsthand. Yet despite these risks, public fascination continues growing. Each new drone video, satellite image, or shoreline discovery raises another question. How much more remains hidden? Could entire sections of the original canyon soon reappear? Will previously submerged archaeological sites eventually become accessible? Or will changing weather patterns stabilize the lake before those secrets are revealed? No one knows for certain. What is clear is that Lake Mead is changing faster than many expected. Every season redraws the shoreline. Every year exposes another chapter of history. And every new image reminds the world that beneath what once seemed like an endless reservoir lies an extraordinary archive of both nature and human civilization, waiting, little by little, to emerge once again. By now, most people have seen the dramatic images. Towering canyon walls marked by the enormous white mineral ring. Boats stranded on dry ground. Once busy marinas sitting far from the water's edge. But what rarely appears in those headlines is the quieter story unfolding behind the scenes. The story of scientists, archaeologists, engineers, and conservationists working together to understand exactly what Lake Mead is becoming. Every month, researchers travel across newly exposed sections of the reservoir, documenting changes before wind, rain, and erosion alter the landscape forever. What they find often tells two stories at once. One is about the past. The other is about the future. Among the most significant discoveries are the traces of people who lived in this region long before Hoover Dam existed. Long before the Colorado River was transformed into a massive reservoir, Native American communities called this harsh desert home. Petroglyphs carved into volcanic rock, ancient campsites, and evidence of seasonal travel routes remain scattered throughout the surrounding landscape. Many of these cultural sites were carefully documented before Lake Mead filled, but others were inaccessible for decades after disappearing beneath rising water. Now, as the shoreline retreats, archaeologists have an opportunity unlike any they've experienced in generations. Every exposed section is carefully surveyed. Every artifact is photographed. Every discovery is recorded before environmental exposure begins causing irreversible damage. The goal isn't treasure hunting. It's preservation. Many of these locations represent thousands of years of human history, offering valuable insight into how earlier civilizations adapted to one of North America's most demanding environments. Their survival depended on understanding water. Ironically, modern society faces many of the same questions. Only now the scale is much larger. More than 40 million people depend, directly or indirectly, on water supplied by the Colorado River system. Cities, farms, industries, and ecosystems all compete for a resource that has become increasingly limited. Scientists describe the situation using a simple phrase: demand now often exceeds supply. That imbalance explains why Lake Mead has struggled to recover even during years with relatively healthy snowfall in the Rocky Mountains. Much of the incoming water is already allocated before it reaches the reservoir. Agriculture remains one of the largest users. Across Arizona, California, and neighboring states, millions of acres of farmland rely on irrigation from the Colorado River. Crops such as lettuce, alfalfa, cotton, citrus, and vegetables help feed millions of people across North America. Reducing agricultural water use isn't a simple decision. It affects farmers' livelihoods, food prices, employment, and regional economies. Urban conservation presents similar challenges. Cities like Las Vegas have invested heavily in water recycling, removing decorative lawns, improving plumbing efficiency, and encouraging residents to reduce outdoor water use. These efforts have produced measurable results. Yet population growth continues increasing overall demand. The result is a constant balancing act. Every gallon saved matters. Every drought season creates new uncertainty. Meanwhile, another group works quietly along Lake Mead's shoreline: forensic investigators. Whenever human remains are discovered, the process begins with careful documentation. Recovery teams secure the area before forensic anthropologists analyze skeletal evidence to estimate age, biological characteristics, and possible cause of death. Modern DNA technology has dramatically improved identification efforts. Even remains that have been exposed to harsh environmental conditions for decades can sometimes be matched to surviving family members through genetic databases and historical records. Some investigations provide long-awaited answers for families who spent years wondering what happened to missing loved ones. Others remain unsolved. Lake Mead has existed for nearly 90 years. During that time, millions of visitors have explored its waters. Boating accidents, drownings, disappearances, and criminal investigations all form part of its complicated history. As water levels continue changing, additional discoveries remain possible. Officials consistently remind the public not to disturb any suspected human remains or historical artifacts they encounter. Instead, discoveries should be reported immediately so trained professionals can investigate appropriately. The lake has become more than a recreational destination. It has become an active historical archive. Technology has also transformed how researchers monitor these changes. Satellite imagery provides detailed measurements of shoreline movement over time. High-resolution drones create three-dimensional maps of exposed terrain. Underwater sonar scans remaining submerged areas, identifying geological features and documenting structural conditions around the reservoir. Artificial intelligence now assists scientists by comparing historical photographs with modern images, helping identify erosion patterns and environmental changes that would otherwise take months to analyze manually. The amount of information collected each year is staggering. Yet perhaps the most important question remains surprisingly simple. Can Lake Mead recover? Hydrologists say the answer depends on multiple factors working together. Heavy snowpack in the Rocky Mountains provides much of the Colorado River's annual flow. Conservation efforts reduce unnecessary water consumption. Improved infrastructure minimizes losses from aging canals and pipelines. International agreements between the United States and Mexico help coordinate river management across borders. No single solution will restore the reservoir overnight. Instead, recovery depends upon countless smaller improvements sustained over many years. Some encouraging signs have already appeared. Periods of unusually strong mountain snowfall have temporarily increased reservoir levels. Water-saving initiatives have reduced consumption in several urban areas. Innovative recycling technologies continue improving efficiency. Still, experts caution against assuming the crisis has ended. Climate models suggest hotter summers may continue increasing evaporation while reducing long-term river flow. Preparing for those conditions has become a priority for water managers throughout the Southwest. But perhaps the most fascinating lesson comes from nature itself. As scientists observe plants reclaiming exposed shorelines and animals adapting to changing habitats, they witness resilience unfolding in real time. Life adjusts, slowly, patiently, relentlessly. The question is whether human systems can adapt just as successfully. Communities built around assumptions of endless water must now rethink everything from city planning to agriculture. The transformation will not happen overnight. But neither did the creation of Lake Mead itself. Nearly a century ago, engineers reshaped an entire river. Today, another generation faces the challenge of reshaping how that river is managed. Because every new drone flight, every newly exposed shoreline, every scientific survey points toward the same reality. The story of Lake Mead is no longer simply about a shrinking reservoir. It has become one of the defining environmental stories of the 21st century, a reminder that even humanity's greatest engineering achievements remain connected to the natural systems that sustain them. And as remarkable as the discoveries have been so far, the final chapter has not yet been written. As the sun begins to set over Lake Mead, the landscape tells a story unlike any other in America. The water reflects towering canyon walls that have stood for millions of years, while the bright white mineral ring circling the cliffs silently marks just how much has changed in only a few decades. From a distance, the reservoir still appears enormous. But those who have watched it for years know that appearances can be deceiving. Every exposed shoreline represents another chapter in an unfolding story. And perhaps the most important chapter is still ahead. Today, Lake Mead sits at the center of one of the most ambitious water management efforts in modern history. Federal agencies, state governments, tribal nations, engineers, scientists, and conservation organizations are working together to answer a question that affects millions of people. How do you manage a river that no longer behaves the way it once did? The Colorado River was divided among growing states during the early 20th century, using estimates based on unusually wet decades. At the time, few imagined that future generations would experience prolonged droughts, record-breaking heat, or explosive population growth across the American Southwest. For years, the system appeared to work. Water continued flowing. Cities expanded. Agriculture flourished. Hydroelectric power supported regional development. But slowly, conditions changed. Each year, less water entered the system than many communities expected. Meanwhile, demand continued rising. The difference between those two numbers may appear small at first. But over decades, that imbalance transformed one of America's largest reservoirs into a symbol of environmental uncertainty. The newest aerial footage captures this reality with remarkable clarity. Where boats once sailed across open water, visitors now walk across cracked lake bed. Where fish once swam, desert grasses have begun reclaiming the shoreline. Where docks floated only a few years ago, they now stand isolated, surrounded by dry earth instead of water. These scenes are dramatic. Yet scientists remind us that they are also valuable. Every newly exposed section offers an opportunity to study geological history, ecological recovery, and human impact on one of North America's most important river systems. Researchers collect sediment samples that preserve evidence of changing climate patterns. Biologists monitor how wildlife adapts to rapidly shifting habitats. Engineers examine shoreline stability around bridges, dams, and recreational infrastructure. Each discovery adds another piece to a puzzle that scientists have been assembling for decades. Perhaps the most remarkable lesson is that nature never truly stops adapting. The exposed shoreline quickly becomes home to insects. Those insects attract birds. Small mammals soon follow. Plants establish roots in freshly uncovered soil. Within only a few seasons, areas that appeared completely barren begin supporting surprisingly diverse ecosystems. This process demonstrates something both hopeful and humbling. Life continues. It changes. It evolves. The challenge lies not with nature's ability to adapt, but with humanity's ability to adapt alongside it. Communities throughout the Southwest are already investing in new technologies. Advanced recycling systems allow treated wastewater to be reused rather than discarded. Smart irrigation reduces agricultural consumption without sacrificing crop production. Cities continue replacing water-intensive landscaping with drought-resistant native plants. New desalination research, groundwater management programs, and regional conservation agreements all represent attempts to prepare for an uncertain future. None of these solutions are simple. None solve every problem. But together, they demonstrate a growing recognition that the future will require cooperation unlike anything seen before. The story of Lake Mead is no longer simply about one reservoir. It has become a global example. Countries around the world now study the Colorado River Basin as they prepare for similar challenges involving climate, water security, and rapidly growing populations. Lessons learned here may help shape water policy far beyond the deserts of Nevada and Arizona. Perhaps that explains why every new image from Lake Mead attracts international attention. People aren't only watching a shrinking lake. They're watching a glimpse of the future. Some visitors arrive hoping to photograph abandoned boats. Others come searching for remnants of forgotten history. Many simply stand quietly along the shoreline, trying to imagine where the water once reached. The enormous white mineral ring stretching across the canyon walls provides the answer. It serves as a reminder that landscapes can change much faster than people expect. And yet, amid all the uncertainty, one truth remains remarkably constant. The Colorado River still flows. Not as abundantly as it once did. Not as predictably. But it continues moving through the desert, sustaining communities that depend upon every drop. Its future now depends upon decisions made not by nature alone, but by millions of people whose lives are connected through a single watershed. The remarkable footage emerging from Lake Mead does more than reveal disappearing water. It reveals consequences. It reveals resilience. It reveals forgotten history. Most importantly, it reminds us that environmental change rarely happens all at once. It happens gradually, year after year, decision after decision, until one day the difference becomes impossible to ignore. That may be why these recent images have captured the world's attention. Not because they reveal a hidden monster, not because they expose an unbelievable secret, but because they show something far more powerful. Reality, a changing climate, a changing landscape, and a reminder that even humanity's greatest engineering achievements exist within the limits of the natural world. Lake Mead has witnessed nearly 90 years of American history. It has powered cities, supported agriculture, created recreation, preserved forgotten stories beneath its waters. Now, as those waters retreat, it is revealing one final lesson. The future is never guaranteed. It is shaped by the choices we make today. Perhaps decades from now, future generations will look back at this period not simply as the time when Lake Mead reached historic lows, but as the moment people chose a different path, one defined by conservation, innovation, and a deeper understanding of the resources that sustain civilization. Until then, every drone flight, every satellite image, every scientific expedition, and every newly exposed shoreline will continue telling the story of one of America's most extraordinary lakes, not as a symbol of disaster, but as a living reminder that understanding the past is often the first step toward protecting the future.